Kate, come on in. Thanks for joining us on short notice. As you know, this administration is committed to transparent, open government. We also are committed to honesty in government. And we promised when we took office that if there were irregularities or areas of state service that we thought was inconsistent with the highest levels of honesty and decency, we would report that to you immediately. So I'm sorry to report to Vermonters today that we have a situation unfolding with a former sergeant of the state police where we fear that there may have been fraudulent activity that stole taxpayers' money by overcharging overtime and other areas of timesheet abuse that is not acceptable to this administration and does not dignify the extraordinary work of the Vermont State Police. We have a two-track investigation taking place immediately. The first is a criminal investigation to see if fraudulent activity took place. The second is I've directed my Secretary of Administration, Jeb Spalding, to immediately engage an independent auditor to look at how and if there is a pattern of activity of this kind in any other areas of the state police, in any other barracks. This particular incident took place in Williston Barrack. It was undertaken by Mr. Jim Deegan. Mr. Deegan was a sergeant of the state police. He is no longer with the state police. We suspended him without pay immediately upon learning of these allegations, and he resigned a short time later. The details that we know so far are as follows. Another officer who had done some overtime work wanted to know the proper code for his timesheet in order to report that work on his timesheet accurately. He did not know the code. So knowing that Jim Deegan had also done some overtime work, he looked to his timesheet to see the code, to find out what the appropriate code was. In doing so, he noted that Mr. Deegan had reported overtime for work that this particular officer had done, and he knew that Mr. Deegan wasn't there. He immediately reported it to his superior. That went up the chain of command exactly as it should have, and was reported to Commissioner Keith Flynn yesterday. We have undertaken immediate action to ensure that appropriate measures are taken to fulfill both investigations going forward. Number one, to find out whether fraudulent activity took place, and if so, to deal with that immediately. And number two, to ensure through the Secretary of Administration's good work that there's a thorough audit of this kind of timesheet abuse to ensure that it's not happening in other sectors of the state police force. So that's what we know. I have with me Commissioner Flynn, Deputy Commissioner John Wood, Colonel Esperance, Sergeant Mike O'Neill, and Commissioner Kate Duffy, as well as Secretary of Administration Jeb Spalding. If you have questions, we'd be happy to answer them. We do want you to know that we will keep you abreast as we go forward to ensure that you have the information that you need as we discover it. I repeat, this administration will not tolerate taxpayers being robbed from in any way, shape, or form. We promised you transparency. We will give you transparency throughout this investigation, and we're sorry that we stand before you today.
How much money are we talking about?
We don't know yet. We do know that Mr. Deegan, former Sergeant Deegan's salary was unusually high. He reported roughly $123,000 in earnings last year. That's roughly $50,000 higher than his base pay, and that obviously is something we're looking at very closely. We're also immediately investigating how far this goes back, and we recognize that it will be a multiple-year investigation that finds out how long this abuse might have been taking place.
When did this start to unfold? When was the other trooper, when was that?
The other trooper looked for the code late last week, what was the day? Last Thursday. It went up to change chain of command. Colonel Esperance was out on Friday. We should never let him go on vacation, but we did. And came to the commissioner's attention yesterday. I was alerted to the problem, the administration was alerted to the problem late yesterday evening. We stand before you today in the hope of full transparency.
How long had Mr. Deegan been working with the Wilson Barracks?
I'm going to give that to whoever wants to take it.
Colonel, you may.
He started his career in 1990.
Is he always working with Wilson?
I'm not sure of his total history, but he's been there for quite some time.
And when was he placed on, or suspended and then subsequently resigned?
He was suspended last night at around 5 o'clock.
And resigned.
This morning around 10 a.m.
Does this seem like an isolated case involving one guy, or is there a systematic problem of lax accounting standards or that allows this to happen?
We just don't know the answer to that. I promise you that we'll give you the answers as we find them out. This is how the system works. If you work overtime, you submit your timesheet with the proper codes. Your superior then reviews that timesheet and signs off on it, so there's a second signature before it's submitted for payment. So as we find that out, we will keep you posted.
But you,
So, is this an indication of maybe too much dependence on the honor system within the state police and other state jobs?
That's one of the things we're going to look at, is we know that, and I want to emphasize this, we have an extraordinary state police force in Vermont. They are honest, hardworking people who sacrifice their lives for us every single day. And one thing the government has to be willing to do when things appear to go wrong is to ensure that we do everything right. And we will go into this investigation, both tracks, with an open mind, with total objectivity, and ensure that taxpayers aren't getting ripped off. One thing I will not tolerate is taxpayers being robbed.
if I could just jump in just for a second, just because you used the word honor, just because you used the word honor system, and to me, honor system would be if there was no checks on it. State police are no different than any other department in state government, that there is a second set of eyes that looks at every timesheet. Whether that's not enough, we will look at it carefully during the review process. It's worth noting that we are investing in a new IT system that's going to improve our ability to do oversight. But even now, it is not a pure honor system. There is a second set of eyes, and that's one of the things we want to find out. A, in this individual situation, what happened if there's a second set of eyes, and B, systematically, do we need a third set of eyes or some other way to make sure that our controls in the situation are adequate?
You ever had any trouble with Sergeant Deegan before?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Colonel Esperance, does the timesheet system require that officers say what they were doing on these hours? I know my time slip says, oh, I was reporting live from, Rutland, where a bridge was out during Irene. I have to say what I was doing.
Yes.
Did he have to do the same thing?
Yes, he did.
What was he doing? Making up assignments that were bogus?
That's just what the investigation is going to tell us. It's still early. Again, we resigned this morning at 10 o'clock, so the detectives that are looking into this case are going to uncover every hour of overtime that was legitimate and not legitimate. That's the goal, to get to the...
And what about the person who signed off on those timesheets?
That's being investigated as well. We're going to look at every single aspect of this. I understand, and I'm sympathetic to some frustration that we don't come to you with all the answers. What I promised was that we would be transparent as things unfold in state government. We believe we have fraudulent activity. We're going to take it very seriously, and as we find out answers, we'll get them to you.
Why is the broader investigation being confined to state police?
That's where we'll start. If we find that we think that there could be similar abuse in other areas of state government, we are open-minded to changing the system for all.
Is he contesting this? I mean, he resigned, but does he have union representation? Is he contesting the allegations?
You know, I think by, what I can tell you now is that he was suspended and then he resigned. And those are the facts we have so far.
Governor, if I can answer your question. The VTA no longer represents him. When he resigned this morning, he was effectively not a member of our union anymore at that point.
And it should be clear that he goes from being Sergeant Deegan to Mr. Jim Deegan. He's no longer with the state police.
Is there any inkling out there, any trace of evidence that leads you to believe that this may be more widespread than this single incident? Just
No, there's not, but no abuse of taxpayers' investigation can take place if you don't go in understanding that you've done the cover, look under every rock, and we will.
Was his resignation part of any agreement he made with authorities as to what would happen in terms of prosecution?
Absolutely not. There's two tracks going on, a criminal investigation and a broader audit of our systems. And there's been absolutely no discussions with Mr. Deegan.
What specific crime would this conduct be a violation of, and what sanctions, what criminal sanctions would he face?
The department right now is doing a criminal investigation. Obviously, they're going to make a judgment about shortly, in the next couple of days, about where we go from there. And then it would be up to, if there were any charges to be filed, it would be up to the Shumlin County State's Attorney to file those charges. That's all we would know so far. That's how the process would work, if indeed there was fraudulent behavior.
But can somebody give me a sense generally of what crimes this sort of behavior would fit in the range of? I mean, is there a felony fraud charge, for instance? What's out there?
Well, what I can tell you is this, that we've been in contact with the Shumlin County State's Attorney since this first started. I've spoke to him numerous times today. We're going to be speaking with him tomorrow. Our investigation is going to entail this. We're going to be the fact finders. We're going to report the facts as we find them to be. We're going to discover those facts and give those to the state's attorney. His office will then make the charging decision as that office feels is appropriate. There are a number of various charges that they could bring, but we'll leave that decision to the state's attorney.
How unusual is it for a trooper to make, I don't know the numbers, $50,000 more than his base salary? Do you see that happen a lot? I know they're busy. There's never enough time. You work a lot of overtime, but that's a lot.
That is high pay for a trooper.
And while if I could, Governor, one other thing, just to jump in terms of the total compensation, just to get the figures right. As you know, the most recent fiscal year started about 9 or 10 days ago. What is it, the 9th today, is that right? Yeah, so it just started. So we actually do have updated compensation figures for Mr. Deegan. It appears that total compensation last year, not including benefits, but salary for base and overtime, was about $136,000.
I misspoke.
And if I got it right, it's on a base of, as you mentioned, about 80.
So what would be a typical overtime now? This was 56,000 more than the norm. What would be typical?
In and around $30,000 a year.
So, about 56 more than the norm.
Right. Listen, we're going to do a thorough investigation. There will not be a stone unturned, and we'll find out whether fraudulent activity took place, and we'll know the nature of it, not just this year, but we're going back several years.
How old is he?
49.
Can we have the spelling of his last name?
Deegan. Right? Spelling was never my strong suit, team, so back me up.
G-A-N?
I believe it's D-E-E-G-A-N.
And do you have a
I'll
hometown
get the
for him?
appropriate spelling. Yeah, they may be an H.
Might be an H in
And
there. We're
what-
asking a dyslexic governor how to spell it.
Will you be looking at just the time cards of uniformed officers, or management and supervisors as well?
We will do a thorough investigation of the entire system within the state police for any time charts, as well as broadening that to other areas of state government if we believe that that's appropriate, and we're going to rely upon the recommendation of the investigation that Secretary Spalding will be overseeing.
Approximately how many employees would be part of the state police portion of the investigation?
Well, certainly it'd include all the sworn personnel. and then we'll look at, actually, we'll look at civilian personnel too.
Ballpark number?
Probably around probably close to 400.
And was it the same supervisor, in this case, the same supervisor who had been signing his PACE, whatever you call them, forms for a long time, or had that person changed?
That's what the investigation will tell us how far back it goes, if there was multiple supervisors.
Supervisors can change within the barracks, so.
Theory of reaction within the ranks.
The trail, trust. This is a case of a public servant who was trusted with a job to do, and he betrayed his badge, his core values. And across the state, this will have a shockwave among the state police members that will have a long-lasting effect.
I just want to emphasize that what makes the Vermont State Police so effective, in my judgment, as their governor and boss, is the fact that we trust them, that Vermonters trust them, that that's who we turn to protect us. And while this is potentially a terrible tragedy, I want to make very clear that I have full confidence in the honesty and integrity of the state police force of Vermont.
Have there been any state employees that have left the government payroll since you've been inaugurated for alleged or confirmed fraudulent activity on?
Not that I'm aware of.
I think there may be one or two that were involved with some other kinds of fraudulent activity. Like I do remember something about somebody, money in a state park or something like that, but I don't believe there have been any other cases that involve fraud in terms of compensation and timesheets.
Right, I think we've had some instances where people have been doing other work while they've been on the clock, so that, we see that as fraudulent payment to them because they were doing other work on taxpayer time, but it's not really exactly the same. And to my knowledge, there are not any of those since the governor took office.
Was this Colonel 4th of July shift involved? That was
Sergeant. Oh,
no.
sorry.
Colonel Westbrook. I thought, did the alleged fraud involve saying you worked on the 4th and when you didn't?
We'll see. Again, there's a lot of investigation that has to take place, but it started on yesterday and worked that way back. So,
But I want to be clear. If you have overtime, if there is as much overtime dollars paid out as appear to be out of the range of the norm, this was not one isolated day of service. This was a much broader problem.
No, but the event at which it was discovered.
Oh.
I thought, since you said it last week.
Right.
just within that pay period, the fourth falls within that pay period. So,
It wasn't taking people going over
And
1 mile over an hour.
Just to confirm, Deegan, D-E-E-G-H-A-N.
G-H-A-N, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And do you have a hometown for him? In the full police blood stuff. Age and hometown?
Is that a trick question?
No.
I'll try to find out and let you know. I'll try to
Is it
track that down.
confidential or not?
no, it's just
That's
No,
not
the town.
he's in Williston Barracks.
Colchester.
And while
Thank
we're
you.
at it, do you know, does he have a lawyer? And if so, do you know who that is?
We don't know.
Do you know how long the investigation is expected to take?
We don't know that. There are 2 investigations.
Right.
A criminal investigation as well as a wider probe audit of the systems. The wider probe of the audit of the systems will likely take longer than an isolated criminal investigation.
And this is a
Fraudulent investigation.
Seems like a pretty full-throated response. Is this in any way meant to send a message to other members of state government that this is?
You know, I trust our state government employees. I think they're honest. I think they work hard. I think they often aren't recognized for their hard work. So really, the message is simple. If this is true, we are heartbroken and deeply disappointed. It doesn't reflect the values of our state employees. We're going to get to the bottom of it and keep you posted as we go forward.
Thank you.
Thanks.